Okay, cool. Well, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me here. It's really cool to see what you guys are doing. It's been a while since I've been in touch with the homebrew community and what you guys are doing, and the beers that were poured for me tonight were excellent. I really enjoyed each and every single one of them. So, you guys are doing some awesome things. As Lauren said, owner, founder, Bagby Beer Company with my wife, Dandy, and we're in Oceanside. Everybody been there? It's fine if you haven't. There's, almost 200 some breweries in the county. I understand if you haven't been by my place, but yeah, as Lauren said, we focus on classic styles. It's something that's important to me. I really like, over my time in the industry, I've worked for a couple different breweries, and kind of found what I enjoyed was looking at these beers that have been done for years and years, and looking at how I could replicate them. I would say early on in my career in San Diego brewing, I guess maybe I could throw a little bit of my experience in brewing American IPA into what San Diego IPA became. But other than that, I don't think of myself as a huge innovator in brewing or experimentalist in brewing. I had the honor of working with Tommy Arthur early on in my career. So a lot of the early barrel-aged sours and things that he was doing, I was a part of, and that was a great experience for me. Unfortunately, the way that my brewery's built and the way that I've experienced those styles of beer over time, I'm not comfortable brewing them in my brewery. So we don't do sours. We don't do any of the crazy stuff that goes on out there. We don't do hazy beer. We don't do, well, we'd make Weiss beer, but y'all understand that. We don't make seltzer. We don't make pastry stout. We don't do any of that stuff. So, you know, thank you. You know, some would say maybe to our detriment, but yeah, we're not really knocking it out of the park with a can release around the block with our alt beer. It's just not what it is. But to have, I'll tell you what, to have somebody from Germany who was born and raised in Dusseldorf and come to your brewery and say, "This is amazing. This reminds me of home," that does it for me. So. So yeah, we like to honor a lot of what we feel came before us. We like to look at all of these styles and continue to try to make them better and better and closer to what they originally were. I see that kind of as a challenge, and some of these beers and some of these styles are amazingly subtle in flavor, aroma, and character. And I feel like that's really, really hard to do, at least from my experience, to do and get what you're really, really looking for that reminds you of a place that you first had that beer or that style of beer. Let's see, what else was I going to say? Yes, I've been in beer in San Diego for a long time. I started working for Stone Brewing Company in 1997, and I've bounced around and been around, but I'm still in the industry and fortunate enough to have my own place now. What was I going to say? I don't have any formal brewing education, and I kind of like and dislike that. There's sometimes when I wish that I could look back and go, oh, that makes sense, and I learned that in brewing school. But all of those things that I've learned that I can say that to is because I've talked to somebody who went to brewing school. So, you know, a lot of, was thinking about tonight and thinking about classic styles and how to present to you guys. I kind of hit a couple of roadblocks because I was like, well, there's probably 100 articles out there about how to make German-style Kolsch. Like, you don't need me to tell you how to do that. You guys in this room probably know a lot more about some parts of brewing than I do. I've just been doing what I do and what I like to do for my brewery, and it's turned out to be successful for me, enough at least to maintain and keep my brewery open. So if there's anything along the way and you have a question about something and I think I can apply it or answer it, please shoot your hand up, because I'm not much of a science brewer. I'm more of an artistic brewer. I think most of you understand what that means. I also don't like school and studying. I never did. I did graduate from UCSB, but I didn't really enjoy it. I wanted to get out and do other things. So I don't spend a lot of time reading. I don't spend a lot of time on that side of stuff, on the science and numbers parts of things. So I'll try to give you what I can if you have questions about those things, but just know right from the get-go, probably not going to get too technical on you guys. I'd rather enjoy conversation and talk about these styles and where they came from. What we do is basically focus on 4 different kind of main categories, we'll call them. So that'd be English, British, Belgian, German, and what I like to call American classics. And the 4-pack that you, or a lot of you got, kind of touched on, there was actually 2 American classics in there with the American IPA and the American Stout. I unfortunately didn't have any of our Belgian beers available in cans. Otherwise, you would have got one of each of kind of that genre that I'm talking about. I did bring some crowlers and some cans tonight of some of those. So there's one Belgian beer there, but it's a little mini Belgian blonde, so you can compare it to Matt's, I guess. Mine's much smaller. It's a little tiny thing. We call it a session or a mini blonde, Belgian blonde. So I don't know when we want to pass those around or. Okay. Cool. Well, maybe we'll wait a little bit. Anybody thirsty? Sean is. They're in the bucket under the table. Sure. Perfect. So in that 4-pack, you had Gotta Pay the Pills. Well, you guys know. That was the German one, and then the English or British one was the Three Beagles Brown. So tonight I brought our back garden, which I kind of call I really modeled it after English style bitter, but realizing that you put the word bitter on a menu anywhere, no one knows what it means, and no one buys it, and no one cares. So, yeah. So, let's pass around the little Belgian blonde. It's called Ivanka. Quick story about that name. One of our good friends in Belgium is Yvan de Betz. He owns and is one of the co-founders of De La Seine in Brussels. And we've made some beers with him before, and we're hanging out one night, and I forget how this came up, but we were talking about smaller things, and my wife asked him how you would say, kind of like Ita or Ito in Spanish. Ivanka would be Little Ivan, so this beer's attributed to him. So it's Little Ivan is the translation there. All right, so as I just kind of mentioned, part of what has kind of fueled my passion and continued my passion for beer and the way that I brew it and the way that I kind of seek it out is travel and conversation and tasting and sharing all about beer. I think that's probably the number one thing. I mean, when I got started in the industry, I'd been a home brewer in college, but nothing super serious. I almost considered myself more of a beer fan than an actual brewer. And when I got hired at Stone and I started meeting people in the industry, I think in San Diego there was only 10 or 12 breweries back then at the time. But meeting the rest of the people in the industry back then and having conversations about these different styles really kind of started it and sparked it. And then traveling to festivals, going to my first GABF in 1997 was like overwhelming. Just meeting all those people and meeting people that made the beers that I'd been drinking for, a few years, and being able to ask them questions and talk to them about beer just kind of shot my experience and my drive through the roof. So anyway, if you haven't traveled, I highly recommend it. And I'm not just talking about going overseas or going to Western Europe. There's amazing beer being brewed all over the world. I went to, I don't know how many countries. 2019 was amazing for me. I went to probably 10 or 12 different countries, maybe more than that. I went down to a festival in Peru. Well, it was a concert, festival, and, or a, not concert, sorry, festival, conference, and kind of just get together of all these Latin American countries. Anyway, phenomenal beers. Some of them not so great, but a lot of them I was like, wow, this is amazing. So, yeah, if you haven't, get out there and travel. It's something I can't wait to do again. I haven't in 2 years. Last time I traveled overseas was in Italy in December of 19 and hanging out with my friends there. And I just can't wait to get back because it's something, like I said, that fuels this. And being able to share my beers with people like you guys all did tonight, you know, I'm sure you guys do in smaller circles, to share your feedback with the rest of your cohorts in the club here, and talk about what you did, what the ingredients were, what you wished for, what you wanted, and do you taste that? Do you get that? What am I doing wrong, kind of thing. And to be able to do that on a scale of, you know, to go meet a German brewer who's been brewing in the same brewery for 35 years and get to ask him questions about what they do and how they operate their brewery and the processes they go through is it's just priceless. You can't get that. And although that's one extreme, you guys are doing that in your small little circles. I used to tell when I was working for Pizza Port, I was the head of brew pub operations for, well, at the time there was 4. We had just opened Ocean Beach in 2010, and I would travel around to the breweries. I was based in Carlsbad. I was the head brewer there, but I would go around and talk with the guys and taste all their beers. And we started having meetings because I would go and taste somebody's beer, and you could tell that they were getting kind of complacent. You can tell, you know, you're like, hey, have you tasted your Shark Bite Red lately? Have you checked in on that? Have you given it to anybody else? So we started doing that with beers that were brewed at all four stores to try and come back and make sure that we were consistent across and that people weren't missing things. And as soon as somebody would say, well, yeah, I taste this, and then the guy who made it would be like, holy shit, you're right. I didn't realize that. And so I mean, you guys do it all the time, but continue to do it. Continue to get feedback. Continue to talk about your beers. It's just going to make you better and better. And whatever you can do to further that and learn about more of that and travel. You know, I had a lot of great classic styles tonight from you guys. You know, use that tool. It's the biggest tool that I've ever had. All right, so Ivanka went around. Shoot, I still have Biggie Stout. Thanks, Stan. So Belgian Styles. We'll start there since that got passed around first. You know, as many of you, like I said, a lot of you guys are gonna be aware of a lot of what I talked about tonight. Belgians brew all over the place. They brew every color of the rainbow, from their mass-produced industrial lagers to their quaint, tiny little, you know, 5 hectoliter lambics breweries. You know, there's just an amazing array of what goes on in Belgium. One of the things that, you know, like I talked about, I don't go for the wild side of beer. I don't do wild fermentation or lambic or anything like that, or sours. But most of my Belgian style stuff is pretty classic, like this little guy. I think it's 4.5%. Super simple. It's actually a yeast blend. We were going back and forth between what would be White Labs 500 and White Labs 530. So Abbey and Trappist, and we kind of liked characteristics of both of them. So we tried to get both characteristics that we liked out of both, and blended yeast, and I kind of liked the way it came out. So we'll probably keep doing that. We've done it a few times. But yeah. a lot of Belgian beer, a lot of classic Belgian beer, I guess, to me is yeast driven. You know, although there's Belgian breweries that are doing everything the rest of the world is doing now, if you look at the classic stuff, the Trappist breweries, the Abbey breweries, the ones that have been around for a while, even the smaller ones. Anybody ever heard of La Roule? Kind of in the south of Belgium, real close to Orval. Gregory, he makes amazing, more classic style Belgian beers. And of course, De La Seine, they're making some stuff that's just, it's like, it's kind of new in the Belgian world to me, some of it. But you drink a beer like Taurus Bulba and you're like, that's as hoppy as some pale ales back home. So they're doing it their way. The Belgians, like I said, yeast driven, so they have their yeast. They're extremely particular about their yeasts and where they get them. Another thing too, everybody traveled to Belgium and met some Belgian brewers. Did y'all notice how sneaky they are? I love them, but you're like, are you telling me the truth, or are you giving me the pathways to the truth, but not the actual truth of what you do? I feel like that happens a lot, but I don't know. You spend a day at Cantillon with Jean, you know how to make his lambic, but you still can't blend it like he does. Anyway, so I think there's still some of that element that I like. Their water is kind of all over the place. Talking about an ingredient that I have not personally spent a lot of time in my life, brewing life. I always liked, and because I was predominantly brewing beers that fit the style of water that's in San Diego County, I always kind of liked that character because it worked. And every time I tried to brew a beer that needed a different water character, it would bother me because it wasn't there. But I didn't have the time or the equipment or the ability to research it and go, okay, how do I make this water better? But if you look at Belgium as a whole, their water kind of is all over the place. There's some areas that are I'd call hard or kind of medium hard, and then there's actually some areas that are soft. So depending on the brewery and depending on what they do to treat, you know, we're kind of still experimenting on that side of things. We know that most of the ales, most of the traditional stuff is from pretty hard water, but some of it isn't, and the yeast react differently to that too, which I've been talking to some of my other friends about. So I don't know. Any experiences with that? Anybody got any tidbits? No? Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Definitely. Carlsbad, where I was really hard. It seemed like the water would change all the time. Solana, by far and away the hardest water that I've ever brewed with in my life. I don't know why, I don't know what it is, I don't know where, but it's always been just super, super, super hard. OB, I didn't have a whole lot of time down there, so I didn't really notice too much, and San Clemente, from what I can remember, was pretty consistent, and still that kind of Southern California, hardish, medium to hard, or almost very hard water. But yeah, definitely variations, and like I said, with the styles, you know, single infusion ales, they like that kind of water. But learning with some of the Belgian breweries is that some of those ales are actually brewed with a little more moderately hard water to even almost softer water. So it's just something that I'm still working on and still thinking about. Like I said, looking at water is a whole new ballpark to me within the last 3 to 4 years. So it's been exciting. So we do a little bit of everything. We've never taken 100% RO and basically built our own water. I always blend some kind of our house filtered hard water, depending on the style. Yeah, it's just so we have an RO system and an RO, call it the storage. You know, I can make quite a bit of RO if I wanted to make our own water. We have just basically like carbon filter. It takes out all the chlorine, chloramine, all of that. The whole house gets that, and that's what gets blended with RO if we're doing something like that. Yeah, but yeah, and then salts. Yeah, we'll test and see where we are, see what we want to try. So we use calcium sulfate, obviously calcium chloride, obviously, and sometimes calcium hydroxide, which is also a new real thing for us that we haven't really messed with too much. But that's it. Those three. Lactic acid, 88% for pH, or acidulated malt to get our pHs where we want them. So, yeah, and that's another thing. It looks like you guys are having a talk on that soon enough. What else about Belgians? One thing, like, you know, it's kind of easy and classic to say, like, if you're brewing a Belgian beer, you use Belgian ingredients. If you're brewing English beer, you use English ingredients, American, etc. But I've found in most of the Belgian breweries that I've been into that there's a lot of German ingredients. A lot of German malt, a lot of German hops, or even Czech hops. There's not much American hops unless it's one of the newer breweries or they're trying to replicate something that they've seen over here. Belgians seem to be pretty tight on that side of things. We talked about yeast. So anything else I can add there? I'm not sure. Belgian beers are, yeah. Ooh, that's tough. I mean, Taurus Bowl is one of my favorite beers in the world, but it's not really a classic Belgian style. It's kind of like a hoppy Belgian blonde. So I don't know, but you mentioned Duvel earlier. I've loved Duvel for years, but you get West Malt Triple, then you start talking about sours, and you know, Cantillon's good friends of ours. So I like them all. Yeah, I'm all over the place. The ones that I found like I don't like are kind of the commercial ones, which unfortunately seem to keep coming around, and they're just, you can almost tell they kind of just don't have. It's gonna sound mean. They don't have any soul. They're just kind of one-dimensional, and they just kind of are. You can tell that they were made and brewed to sell and to almost fool the public or fool somebody into thinking that came from some small artisanal Belgian brewery when it didn't. So that's another thing. Be careful if you do go over there to watch for those beers. Make sure the breweries that you're buying from and that you're tasting from are, you know, yeah, Duvel's huge, but they still make awesome beer. That if you're looking at the smaller breweries, that they're actual smaller breweries and not some part of some conglomerate. All right. Let's see. You guys want another beer? Yeah, Stan. Good question. Yeah, didn't talk about that at all yet. So, some of our Belgian beers, what's that? The Ivanko is filtered. So I have a plate and frame filter. I filter a lot of my beers with. Some of our Belgian, the only Belgian styles that we don't, we make I'll call it somewhat traditional Saison, and that's unfiltered. But most of the rest of the Belgian beers, unless I have a lot of time, we've only made it twice, but we make a Belgian dark strong, and I just let that one sit for so long that it basically drops bright. Belgian yeasts aren't very flocculent, and findings for me haven't really worked very well in my past, in my history with them. So the ones that we want really bright, we filter. Some are all the way down to 1. But yeah, we have pads that range from 2 to 5, and then it's like under 2 to 1. And then we have some other pads that are more coarse for other things, but we haven't used those in a while. Most of the pads that we have were bought for our lagers. So they're real tight. Yeah. Any other questions on those? Cool. Yeah, why don't we pour Back Garden? Does anybody know what a back garden is? It's like British for your backyard. So it's a backyard beer. This is the first beer we ever made at Bagby Beer Company. First beer. not this actual growler. Yeah, I don't think I'd hang on to 7-year-old 4% English beer that long. Who knows? It might still be good. So it's yeah. Oh, that's hard too. I don't know. Sometimes we have a couple of beers that just zing through. Like you can almost just brew blind. Like they just work so well on the kit, but then it's almost too easy, so it's not challenging or that fun because you're just like, yep, hit my number, hit my time, hit my this, that. Everything just goes like a dream. And then there's others that I love the final product and that challenge me through the process that I really like brewing too. So, and one of the things that's been kind of fun lately is working on our lagers, and our brewing system is definitely not designed to have a mash regime that would go with lager brewing. So trying to do even just step infusion mash, we can't decoct, but that's kind of a challenge to me to see if we can hit numbers where we want to and still be able to keep our mash from being complete liquid. So that's kind of fun, you know, kind of puts a challenge on the day other than just hitting everything. So favorite to brew, it's hard to say. All of them. Regional, it would be, you know, there's several different beers for each category, right? You know, information, the landlord, Tim Taylor. If anybody knows it or had it, if you've been to the UK, you've been to London or anywhere up in the north, I've actually been lucky enough to tour the brewery. Talk about secretive. It's the most crazy secretive brewery. They wouldn't let us take our phones on the tour. We had to put on full white suits and everything. And it was funny because we're watching this and I'm like, yeah, okay, clean brewery, I get it. And then we asked, we're like, hey, you know, can we see how you guys store your yeast? And I'm like, we're cleaner than that. Like, wow. But okay, cool. I can't take a picture and I got to wear a white suit. No problem. But no, Tim Taylor's one of my favorite cask ales, probably maybe my favorite cask ale, other than when Fuller's used to do, they don't make it anymore. Chiswick Bitter. Damn good cask. Woo. Missed that beer. Yeah? Yeah, those two. But so Back Garden, like I said, wanted to be an ordinary bitter. Tim Taylor is more of a pale ale. It's got a little more color on it. So I tried to bring a little color into this beer. Being that it was the first beer we ever brewed at Bagby Beer, we did not have silo malt. So it was all bags. And we were literally running water that day. And it was like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I'm kind of sitting there doing walking the brews through in my head. And I look at Brandon and another guy that we had at the time that was kind of a brewery assistant. I'm like, all right, well, we can brew. You guys want to do it? They're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, we're going to be out of here at like 3, 4 in the morning. Does that work for you? But they were both like, yeah, we want to make beer. So we did, and we milled in. So it's Maris Otter base, has a little bit of biscuit malt in it, which that flavor kind of comes off as bready, biscuity in the body of it, and I just really, really like that character. I don't think there's any British breweries that are actually doing that, but they're using Golden Promise, gives that kind of character sometimes, but we didn't have Golden Promise the night I made this, yeah, I got a little of the character of that out of Chris's ESB in the middle of it. What else? It's Fuggles, Target, and EKG are the hops. and the yeast is a house ale strain, which I could probably spend 4 hours talking about. But the general side of it, you guys have probably heard of La Cruda through Pizza Port, through Tommy and Lost Abbey. I did some research a while back trying to find that strain and its origin. I wasn't able to, but having tasted enough British beer, and I'm pretty sure it's somewhere in the UK, but to have the character that it does, the attenuation that it does, and not have a real high ester profile, that's pretty hard to find in English yeast. Most of them throw a pretty notable, with the exception of Fuller's. Fuller's is pretty clean, but it's still got this, you're just like, yep, that's Fuller's kind of character to it. But a lot of the other strains have a real high fruity ester note to them, and it's, while they're great and they make the beers really exciting, to me anyway, it's not what I wanted in this beer. Yeah.
So what does the process look like for you if you're, say you're trying to create a new beer and you're trying to figure out, well, I want to make an English pale ale or something like that. What goes through your mind? What do you do when you're trying to develop that beer and say, I want to make a beer that fits this style? What's your process?
Good question. So I'd never made Kolsch till we had Bagby Beer Company. I'd always wanted to make Kolsch, loved Kolsch, been to Cologne several times, tasted that beer. So I'm like, how do I do this? Well, I'm going to go talk to the brewers that I know that make really good ones and ones that I feel like are to style and back home. So I did that first. I was like, okay, well, I'm assuming it's a Pilsner malt base, assuming there's some other base malt in there or some other malt. Yeah, a lot of people are like, oh, we use a little bit of wheat malt. And it wasn't just one person and it wasn't just one conversation. It was like, yep, this is what we do. And some reason, several of them, German Tet. I'm like, all right, sounds good, try that. And then yeast strain, I actually swapped private strains with a friend of mine. I had a Belgian strain that he really liked, and he had a Kolsch strain that I really liked, and I really loved his beer. I was like, do you want to, you give me yours, I'll give, yeah. So we've gone on for years that way. And so, yeah, I sometimes it's frustrating because I use the same strain for my alt beers I do for Kolsch. So I'll brew Kolsch first, harvest, brew alt. But I always, that's about as far as I can get. I don't have any other styles that I want to make with that strain, but I also can't give it to anybody because it's a private strain. Because I'd love to, a lot of us brewers share yeast, probably like you guys, I would assume do. I don't know. Maybe you harvest and repitch and share or not. Mostly buy fresh. That makes sense on your size, I guess, but depending on how much you're making, I don't know. But yeah, so back when in Pizza Port days we have 4 pubs to bounce yeast around with, it worked great. So we're like, oh, okay, you got that strain in, okay. But now, when I brew Kolsch, it's just kind of like, oh, I'm gonna brew that, and then if I need alt or I need a beer that nearly no one understands or wants to drink, then I'll brew that. But yeah, I try to look at all the ingredients. Any beer that I look at that I'm trying to make, I'll go and get examples of, and kind of in my mind weigh that ahead of time before tasting them. How much do I think this is going to fit the style? And then, kind of look at it in layers. Look at its appearance, look at its head retention, its aroma, its flavor, its bitterness level, its body, its finish. Is it dry? Is it cloying? Is it clean? Is it have some other kind of character that isn't easily identifiable? And then try and figure what that is. I mean, the first couple times I was really getting into trying to make Kolsch. I know we keep going to that, and we haven't really talked about the Germans, but who cares? The nuance of that beer is so delicate, and so that yeast character I haven't found in any other beer. Some Kolsch is hoppier than others. Some of them have like a little slight noble floral hop aroma on the finish, and some of them are just a little bit bitter than others, but the bitterness isn't really identifiable as a hop flavor, just more clean bitterness. it's that yeast and that character, and it's like a white wine kind of grape almost character, and it's subtle, but it balances, and when you get it right. Of course, I'd love to be serving our Kolsch out of a Stitch Foss on the bar like they do in Cologne, because I think that really adds to the way that beer's dispensed. It's probably a little bit more of a natural carbonation than I can do, but man, it's awesome. Yeah.
Yes. Can you take us now? You just brewed a Kolsch, and now you're going to the alt beer.
Yeah.
Which is a really interesting beer. Has a lot more character, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us where you're going with that, because
Tell us what?
where you go with that. What is your thinking on an alt beer, and where should it be?
Well, I mean, Dusseldorf's a 20-minute train ride from Cologne. You pretty much, I've never been to one without going to the other, at least for a while. I mean, I've stayed in Dusseldorf for a few days. I've probably stayed in Cologne more than I've stayed in Dusseldorf, but I'm always going to one or the other, depending. And so I actually got a really cool tour of an alt brewery in Dusseldorf, and it's called Fusion. It's one of my favorites. They're a little more of a lighter colored alt beer, but still has a really nice bitterness and that just kind of alt character. To me, the yeasts are very similar, and if I just think logically in history and time, you're that close, you're both on the Rhine, makes sense that those yeasts are that similar, or that they produce a beer that's that similar. And a lot of the people that I talked to that made both were like, yeah, we always use same yeast for each beer. The hard part was the malt, because it's kind of all over the place. And if you look at some, they literally look like brown ale, and some, but their bitterness is higher. And then others have a little bit more of a red or kind of brownish amber color to them, but they're lighter in overall pigment. And I'm like, I don't know what layer. There's definitely some Munich, definitely some Munich, but the body and the finish are so dry and clean. Like you said, how do you go about that? That was experiment and talking to a lot of other brewers whose alt beers I really, really liked. You know, I've talked to some people like, no, I'm like, is there any amount of chocolate malt in these beers? You know, and I'm like, the Germans aren't using chocolate malt. They're using Munich, Munich, you know, at differing levels. And so it just took some experimentation and to get the color that we wanted, and the bitterness too. Like I said, some of them are bitter. I'm not talking shtick beer. I'm still just talking alt. And man, they're so drinkable. Like both those cities, man, you got to be careful because they just keep bringing them to you. Yep. Yeah, it was. Yes. Yeah.
It's going to be a quick question. You just changed the Kolsch name. Is it the same recipe or?
It's the same recipe.
Okay.
The only thing we changed from before was a little bit more, just a tiny little tweak on water. That was it.
Okay, thank you.
Everything else the same. Actually, the only reason, and I brought Kolsch cans, so we can probably should have passed those around. But we couldn't. We had a hard time with label approval with our original name of Kolsch. It came from of course of Kolsch. Anyway, so we changed it, and Dandy came up with that name. It just means wooden barrel. Kolsch Foss sounded cool. Probably was a beer that was in a barrel at some point in time in its history. So.
For what it's worth, of Kolsch is probably my favorite beer in San Diego. So.
Oh, thank you.
Fantastic
Awesome.
Beer.
Thanks.
Perfect beer for the summer.
That's cool. Thank you. Yeah.
Hold please. Hold please.
Okay.
So, thank you. Sorry. I missed your name, Chad, Chris. So I have the opposite question of Chris. Chris said, I'm a technical brewer.
Yeah.
I want a technical answer, brewing to style.
Yeah.
I'm a technical water person and a very lazy brewer.
Okay.
So as someone interested in brewing to style, BJCP, but in the brew house, I'm not working. what might I keep in mind if I'm too lazy to go to, say, the homebrew store while it's open? How can I still try to brew to style?
So, you're too lazy to go to the homebrew store to get ingredients, or you said you're a water person?
So, sometimes you have the best intentions, and then you just
So you're just going with what you have, and you're going to brew. You have yeast, and you're going to make something, but you want to do it.
I can
to
give
style.
a lot of examples the club doesn't care about, but yeah. I'm looking around the brew house right now. It's my garage. I have blank in mind. What are something I could consider like?
I see. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, looking at that, that's kind of how Back Garden became a beer, because we were like, okay, we've got these really nice British hops that we can use. We've got our ale strain that we know will work, and then the rest of it was the grain and choosing how and what, and obviously the percentages of what we were going to do. So depending on your situation, I would probably, again, think of it in layers. Like, think of like, okay, I've got this malt, or I've got these base malts, and I've got these colored malts, and I think, to me, it starts with the yeast. Whatever yeast you have is really going to guide, if you got lager yeast, you're going one way. If you got Belgian yeast, you're going one way. And if you got, Weiss yeast, you're pretty limited. Nice. So, yeah, I would look at what kind of colors you could create, or color that you're looking for. If you're trying to, I'm thinking most often you're going to have, most people carry or would have in their brew house ale ingredients, 2-row base malt or Maris. Maybe you do have Pilsner malt. And then looking at your colored malts or textured malts, like, texture is a big thing to me in beer. I've been talking to a lot of other brewers about it lately, and depending on your style and what you're going for, it's kind of the last ingredient or the last little thing that people think about. And it relates a lot to body, obviously, but texture a little different. So, if you have you have oats, you have wheat, you have something else like that can create texture. Also, hops can create texture. Lower alpha varieties in the middle of a boil, things like that can really add a different nuance in texture. It's really hard to notice and pinpoint, but those are other things that you can think about. And I wish you could be like, I've got these 3 or 4 malts, and I've got this yeast, I got that, and then I could be like, well, do this, and this, and try this percentage. But I don't know. That's why I say just kind of look and think. You can always, if you're curious about colors, you can always, just steep and see what you get, see what aroma, see what kind of flavor you get, and go from there. That's kind of what I would do. I hope that helps. You guys like the Kolsch? Did everybody get some? Cool.
Yeah, Kolsch is great. Question that, because this is what I've gotten off the Kolsch I made, is that white grape kind of character, but not as intense as yours. How would you get the yeast to maybe push that direction? Is that a temperature thing? Is it a pitch rate?
Experiment.
Experiment?
Only thing I can think of. Yeah, because some yeast, like, if you think about esters and yeasts, I worked for White Labs for like 9 months, but I don't have the education behind a lot of the chemistry that goes on with yeast, right? So some yeast do really cool things when they're stressed. Some yeast do really bad things when they're stressed. Some yeast do really cool things at different temperatures, or really bad things at different temperatures, right? So you just have to find out what works. I had this conversation with a lot of people in the brewing world that use dry yeast. And a lot of the breweries that I go to, after I have 2 or 3 of their beers, I'm like, you guys using dry yeast? Because I feel like if you're a brewery and you don't have a house ale strain, or you don't have a house lager strain, or you don't have strains that you use all the time, I always suggest that they train one into doing what they want it to do. And of course, that's a lot easier on a brewery side, where you're brewing all the time, and you can take yeast from one beer and put it into another, and you can you can manipulate things like temperature and time and cell count even, or weight, to know if you're actually stressing that yeast or if you're giving it oxygen rates is another thing.
Okay.
You know, and we talk, I almost brought it, but I didn't. On the German side, our Weiss beer, so last year collaboration with Bierstadt in Denver, and they don't make any ales at their place, so we made it at our place. But we've been talking about Weiss for years, and Bill at Bierstadt's a big Weiss fan, and he's won some medals with it. So we were talking back and forth about those strains and how they work. And I mean, he was talking about some German breweries that basically don't even oxygenate that yeast or that wort when they make that beer, because they want to stress that yeast out to get that perfect ester profile between the bubblegum, the banana, the clove, the vanilla, the hint of smoke, all of those different things. Yeah. They know what oxygen level with temperature and with cell count to push the yeast to do that. So in my estimation or guesstimation, it could just be the strain, because of course I can't remember the German brew house it came from. I'd have to call my buddy in Chicago, but I think that's part of it, because a lot of the other Kolsch strains out there, I don't get that much of that aroma from. And I think we fermented at 60 degrees. Yeah, 60 degrees the whole way. So most of and this is just us, we don't do any temp rises on any of our beers. Ales, lagers, anything, we don't do it. So once one of our lagers goes into the tank for fermentation for primary, it's never going to be warmer than that unless somebody takes a can later on and leaves it in their trunk. Like, it's never going to leave the brewery having been warmer than 48 degrees, because that's where we ferment all our lagers at.
Okay.
So I sorry, it's not an answer to your question, but yeah, if you can experiment or try and talk with other brewers who are like, oh, you use that strain, that Kolsch strain, what temp did you ferment at? What was how much, do you know what your pitching rate was? And things like that, you might be able to get closer. Water also affects it too. So many variables.
Yeah. I think I forgot. It's like, oh yeah, you got that awesome private strain. You can taste it, I think. Which also reminds me, thanks to your collab with Bierstadt, I contacted Ashley, and she actually gave us a remote presentation, I think 2020, and we got her to ship out beer to you. So thank you for getting the beer in. Yeah. Because I think a lot more people in this club now know about Bierstadt from that.
Cool. Yeah, they're amazing. They're great friends, and yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about the YouTube channel earlier. Ashley's talk is the most popular.
Oh, nice.
Talking about brewing lagers, the most popular YouTube that we have on the channel.
So when we were in South America, I went down there with them. She did a lager talk. I did a talk on dark ales, porters, and browns. And yeah, it was well attended, even in Peru.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And especially lacing. And so I use flake barley.
Mm-hmm.
I use carafoam to try to bring those out. And a friend of mine keeps pushing me to try chit malt. Do you have any experience with chit, and whether or not it's a good replacement or even better than using carafoam or flake barley?
I don't even know what that is, man.
Nice.
Sorry.
He wants to know if you know your chit.
Yeah. I guess I don't. Sorry. Yeah.
I have a question on
Oh. Go ahead, Matt.
You've mentioned a lot about tracking numbers and doing experimentation and stuff like that. Do you guys use like a particular IT system within your brewery, and how's that like wired into all your systems, or are you just tracking this all by hand based off of your like shaking your head on
Like I said, I'm an artistic brewer. It's all written down on a brew sheet, and it's in my notebook and in my brain.
Lots and lots of notes. That's awesome, man. That was my question.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I've been witness to that. Watch this man brewing. He's always taking notes and referring to his notebook. I've seen it.
Yeah, we do. So I transfer gravities to and transfer dates, but it's just for taxes. the brew and even God, who was it? Was it Brandon? I think it was Brandon. One time he's like, where do you want me to put this? I'm like, the brew book? He's like, yeah. He's like, we just got it sitting here. And he's like, it's got like the last 2.5 years of brews in it. Like, you just want this thing hanging around? I'm like, God, I never really thought about that.
Mr. Trout, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. One of the beer styles that you do that kind of impressed me a lot is the you have a malt liquor.
Oh yeah.
And there's not many people that have a craft malt liquor, and it was phenomenal and very well hidden alcohol. It almost is like an imperial cream ale, but yeah, it was so drinkable for what it was. And could you talk about that?
Sure. So you're talking about Corn Star. That's a malt liquor we've done a couple of times with our friends Sun King in Indianapolis. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to Indiana, but they grow a lot of corn in that state. So we got the first time we did it, we were all about to go up to Firestone for their invitational, and they flew to San Diego first, and they checked 50 pounds of heirloom popcorn on the plane. And when they got to San Diego, we air popped the whole thing. It took us hours and many switching plugs, and so we do it the night before so that hopefully it stays as fresh as possible. We put it in big trash bags, and we start our mash, and then we throw the popcorn into the mash. And I think, like you mentioned, Brian, that it was kind of like a big cream ale, and I think that's what popcorn seems to do to me. In beer, it has this kind of sweeter note to it. You taste the first runnings on the lauter. It tastes like cotton candy. It's crazy. It's really cool. And so we focused on corn on that beer, so it had the popcorn, it had flaked corn. We actually used some 6-row as well to kind of try to get that real American malt liquor character to it. And one time we did use some dextrose, some corn sugar, but we didn't like the way that it shot the gravity up, and we didn't feel like it really needed it. It was already strong, so we just dropped it out the second time, and I think the beer was better the second time we made it. But yeah, just a strong American lager. I love that beer too. Then yeah, it is kind of funny to think about craft malt liquor. By kind of definition, that kind of doesn't work, but yeah, that's a fun beer. That's a fun beer to make. But the second time we did it too, we popped 75 pounds of popcorn. It took 5 hours and 12 air poppers.
Thank you.
We had Brandon upstairs, me down in the brewery, and Dandy in another room with like 3 or 4 poppers each, because you can only pop so much at a time, and they overheat like crazy. So anyway, what we do for beer, huh? How much? So 75 pounds of popcorn, and the grist was probably, total grist was probably in the neighborhood of 1,400, 1,500 pounds. So it's a little bit, but a little bit goes a long way with the flavor.
Follow-up question about the popcorn. How badly did it stink when you burned half of it?
Oh, good question. It smelled amazing because we didn't burn any of it. Because we were really careful to make sure that didn't happen. Yeah, so yeah, we had to buy a bunch of air poppers, but yeah, and that's why you start to learn a lot about an air popper when you use it for 5 hours. You're like, oh, it needs a break. You need to cool down. I'm gonna use this one and go back to you in 5 minutes. And yeah. All right. Well, that leads into American classics, I guess. And what we do there, that's definitely one of the beers that I would consider that falls into that category. All the American versions, right? American Pale Ale, American IPA, American Brown Ale, American Imperial Stout, American Barley Wine, all of those beers that, for me, in the 90s, I drank a ton of because that's what was around, it was available. And so many of those are, God, they're just fun, and some of them are really aggressive, some of them have some nice nuance and balance to them, but they all have American hops in them, which, come on, we make some really amazing, or grow some really amazing hops in this country. So, technique there, I mean, we're using, again, the ingredients come from the place, North American two-row. Actually, some of the crystal malts that we use in some of the beers are British, because I just think they're better. But we have used some American and the hops. Yeast-wise, we talked about La Cruda before. We do use Cal Chico 001, whatever you want to call it, 1056. We use that sometimes, depending on the beer and depending on what we have in house, or if we need to borrow yeast from somebody to make beer. We'll use that. But that's pretty much it for the American ales, American lager. That yeast is all of our lagers are the same yeast, and it's Augustiner. I just really like the way that yeast works, so that's what we use there. We haven't really switched it up just because I know how it works and I know what to get. Like we talked about earlier, I know what I'm going to get from it. So, Augustiner Brau. Yeah. I don't know. Classics. I did want to mention, or I did want to talk a little bit on just about kind of the state of breweries and what we're all going through. I know a lot of you frequent a lot of breweries, and trust me, a lot of us appreciate that greatly, and I'm probably preaching to the choir when I tell you guys that a lot of breweries are having a hard go right now. And I know I'm not the only one. So whatever you guys can do to support, to let your friends know, just because a tasting room reopens or a restaurant reopens, it doesn't mean that everything is back to normal. It doesn't mean that restaurant still isn't having hard times behind the scenes. We're trying to do everything we can, and I work every day to try and make sure that my brewery stays alive and keeps going. And I know, like I said, I'm not alone, but we appreciate so greatly things like you guys coming on your pub night, buying a 4-pack, anything like that. You guys are different from a lot of the customers that we get because they don't understand the other side of it. So if you can help spread that word, help spread the support, it helps keep us around. So.
Well, we really appreciate the hard work that you do to make sure that we've got some good product out there to consume. Thanks.
Yeah. And I know you guys have I think the lambic thing on the 12th. If you don't want to stand around and make lambic for 12 hours, we got our Breweries Festival. I don't know if anybody's ever been before, but it's a breast cancer benefit event. Coming back, we had a year off last year for COVID, and Melanie asked me if I could mention it to you guys tonight because she knows what beer fans you guys all are.
Yeah, if you're not at the Lambic Brew Session, you should be at Breweries. Yeah,
you could. Breweries, well, VIP starts at noon, regular session starts at 1, so if you go at dawn and hang out at Andy's place for a little while, you can get the mash in, you can get close, and then you can go and drink. I think we have 30 or 40 breweries this year, a little bit smaller in the last couple of years, but yeah, it's going to be good.
Looking forward to it.
Cool. All right. Thank you for having me. It's cool to be here. Yeah.